Hello, Garland Nixon here, and we're going to talk about the deal making work that's going on between the United States and Iran, Russia, and China. I mean, think about it. Everyone talks about these deals separately, but I think we need to talk about them all together. Let's put them together and see if we can make sense of it. Let's talk. Hello, Garland here, and we're going to talk about deals. Let's fake a deal. Let's fake a deal. You know, I thought about that. There used to be a game show for people in other countries who may not be familiar with it. There used to be a game show in America, and the name of the show was "Let's Make a Deal," right? And it was always like the game show host would say, "Okay, you can win this," and he'd have something there and say, "Or you can take what's behind curtain number 3." And behind curtain number 3, it could be something good or it could be nothing. It could be a joke, whatever. But you had to keep making decisions. And if you took the next one, he'd say, okay, now you can take this. And he'd show you this great thing you had. And then you can go into the next thing. Or you could take box number 1. Which would you choose, right? So it was let's make a deal. And they were always bargaining. And he was always trying to figure. They had little games they would play. And it was actually a fun show. So the bottom line was, you never knew what was on the other side, but you knew it could be good or bad. So here we have what I think is interesting in America and the way Americans compartmentalize things. So here we have the United States playing ostensibly, let's make a deal. I call it let's fake a deal with 3 different countries. And people are talking about them as though they're 3 separate things, right? Oh, they're talking with the Iranians about nuclear, what the Iranians are allowed to do. As far as nuclear, from a nuclear perspective, right? They're allowed to, develop this on nuclear, non-weaponized stuff. They're able to, what percentage of nuclear material they're allowed to have, all these kinds of things, right? Now, there are a couple of parameters here. And number one, and that is that, I guess parameters not the right word, but there's a dynamic here. And the dynamic is this. If we start there and we put them all together, the dynamic here is what? Number one, the United States has the authority to determine the outcome. What's a good deal? What's a bad deal? What we'll take, what we won't take. And the authority implies the capacity to enforce the outcome, right? So the U.S. says, we'll take this, we won't take that. You're only allowed, this is what you hear. Witkoff said they're allowed to have 3.6%. Witkoff says no percentage, right? So we have the authority to tell them what percentage they can have. They've got to do this. They don't have to do that. And then it goes to, well, they're not allowed to have, they also can't supply their allies with whatever we say they can't supply their allies with, and they got to get rid of their ballistic missiles. There's all these things, right? But there's an implication here, and this is the implication in all of them, and an implication in any deal, right? You and I are talking, and I say you can or can't do this. If you're on a playground yard, if there's a bunch of kids, what is a child going to say to another child? And this actually boils down to the ultimate dynamics of any negotiation. What is a child going to say? One child says, you better give me that ball. That's my ball. What's the other child going to say? Who's going to make me? Right? Who's going to make me? And even kids will say things like this. And they're like, I'm going to make you. Yeah, you and who else's army? It's child talk. But it comes down to this. Listen to children. They understand the reality of nature. They're closer to the reality of nature than we are, right? The reality of nature comes like that. Who's going to make me? You and who else's army? So as the U.S. says to Iran, if we start there, and then we'll talk about the 3 of them independently, and we'll bring them all together. If the U.S. is talking to Iran and they're implying that they have the authority to lord over this deal, to determine what's a good deal, what's a bad deal, what they won't take, what they will take, right? It implies that they have the capacity to enforce the outcome of the deal. However, whether or not they have the capacity to enforce the outcome of the deal is something that really needs to be determined prior to the negotiations. Because if there is a difference in agreement on whether or not one party or the other has the capacity to determine the outcomes of the deal and to enforce the determination they make, if that is not determined before the negotiations start, the negotiations are always kind of a fake. It's always kind of a fraud. Hanging over the negotiations is always the child's playground term. Who's going to make me? You and who else's army? Right? So the U.S. goes in and says China can't, Iran can't have this, Iran can't have that. And Iran's saying, well, you know what, we won't take a deal that we don't feel is fair, it benefits us, and can't be enforced. And the U.S. says, you got to take the deal. Before we even start, who's going to make them? Right? That's ultimately, if you think about it, that's the only thing that really matters with any deal and in any negotiation is the ability to enforce the outcome. Even if you and I are peers, we're equal, right? We make a business deal. What's the only thing that matters? How do we enforce if I do this, you'll do that. If we have a business that we start, we have to have some kind of a written contract that says what happens if one of the other partners dies. What happens? The family, it may say, for instance, you may have a contract that says two people have a business. Now, this business could be bringing in, $2.5 million a year net, right? Okay. If one of the partners dies, me and Joe Blow started. My family, let's say, heirs, however they may be, or whatever age they may be concerned that if I drop dead, this guy just keeps the whole fact. And their dad was instrumental in building this company, right? So what do they want? They want a contract that says, hey, if this happens, number one, you agree to buy them out at whatever percentage, or you agree to, in perpetuity, provide that family with such and such percent of the profits or this or that, whatever, but however you determine. But in the end, everybody's happy, right? But you got to have an outcome. Now, what good does that do if you can't take it to court? So you have to have a well-written contract signed by everything, and then you have to have a valid court system. So you can go to the courts, boom, and it can be enforced. Because if I live in a country where there isn't a valid system of ultimate authority and determination over contracts, so what good is it? There are countries where there are tribal leaders or warlords, we call them, right? Wherein two people in a village make a deal and the deal goes bad, and it's, what do you do? Well, guess what? You go to the tribal leader. You go to the tribal elders and you say, we made a deal for 100 goats versus 20 sheep. He won't give me my goat, sheep, or whatever. And the tribal, religious, warlords, whoever sits down. There are countries where effectively you have organized crime leaders. And it works well. The only thing you need is somebody. And two guys have a disagreement. They go there, not just countries, there are areas, regions where two guys have a disagreement, and they go to the local or leader for organized crime and they say, hey, whatever your name is, we have a dispute. And the organized crime leader says, the two of you have to pay me X amount of dollars in tribute and I'll make a decision. They come to him, they each say, here's your $1,000. Organized crime leader, here's what he has to say. And he says, okay, here's what happens. You're going to do this. You're going to do that. Everybody walk away. Now, ultimately, he's an organized crime leader. You came to him and asked him. But what do you know? That if one of the guys don't go along with it, he's going to kill him or beat him up or whatever. He will have the ultimate authority to take kinetic action and ensure that his ruling is made whole, right? Is complied with. But all that makes sense for this perspective. From the very beginning, when these people go to this organized crime leader, tribal elder, whatever, warlord, that's what they want. Ultimately, they got a disagreement. They want somebody that can enforce agreement. It may be fair, it may be unfair, but in order for them to go on with their business, they need this agreement to be dealt with, right? Okay, here's the problem that we have. Why any deal with the US empire is a fake deal. Okay, what's going on right now at the International Criminal Court? The International Criminal Court is looking into some very obvious violations by the US and Israel. Obvious. And what is the US doing? The US is saying we're going to sanction the people at the International Criminal Court and their families. We're going to sanction their bank accounts, seize any assets they have in the US. We're going to take action against the international body who's has the authority, who has been granted the authority to look over this circumstance and make a decision and take action. We're not even going to allow them to look into it. So I'm going to make a deal with you as you sanction the international body that in theory I may need to go to at some point to iron out this deal. What kind of deal is that? How do I, if I make a deal with the United States, again, it's always a fake deal. If I make a deal with the US in the same way that as we go on, the US is implying that they can dictate the outcomes, right? They're saying, not implying, they're saying that they have the ability to dictate the outcomes. That also implies that they have the ability to enforce dictation of said outcomes, that they can say, this is what you got to do. And if you don't do it, we can enforce it. Okay. Which means in the same way that they're arguing that they're a mediator in the Ukrainian conflict as they are a belligerant, they are arguing that they're trying to mediate a deal with Iran, but they're making belligerent statements. They're not, you can't be a belligerent and a mediator at the same time. Okay? You can't be. So my point is, in the same way that you can't mediate with Russia and Ukraine as you're providing weapons and intelligence and involved in attacks on Russia, you can't mediate with Iran as you support Israel, which does in fact take regularly terrorist attacks against Iran, and you threaten more attacks on Iran. And might I add, the idea that you're mediating and you're at the same time saying, I will dictate the deal. Number one, this is what you can or can't do. This is not we're not people who are working on a deal. That's not even a deal. Here is a contract that you have to sign. You can't do anything I tell you that you can't do. And at the same time, again, you're saying, and if you don't take this, I will brutally and viciously attack you. They're not working on a deal. It's a fake deal. They're faking like they're working on a deal. What they're trying to do is impose their will on Iran. But it takes us back to the schoolyard bully argument. Who's going to make me? It goes back to this. Does the United States have the capacity to force Iran to do it? Now, we could argue yes or no. But if we get into dig a little deeper into that kinetic ability to do it, there's another part of that has to be taken into account. Let's just say that you and I get in a physical confrontation and I can win, but just by a little bit. It's tough. And we fight for I don't know how long. And in the end, I win, but just barely. So I won. But I'm blind in one eye because you poked me in the eye. I took elbows, punches, knuckles, everything. I lost a couple teeth. My mouth is bloody and swelled up, and I got to go get stitches all inside. I got kicked in the groin, so I got serious problems that I got to go to a doctor to it. I got to go see a urologist. I got broken bones. I'm bleeding heavily. I've been slashed and I'm bleeding and I'm trying to stop the bleeding. I'm afraid I'm going to bleed to death. I may bleed to death. My life is in danger, right? So I just want to fight. Barely. But I'm in mortal danger and I'm hurt bad. Do I really want to get in a fight? that after I win the fight, I'm missing an eye, teeth missing, the whole inside of my mouth stitched together where people bashed my lips and they smashed into my teeth, and that cut all the inside of it, and the teeth that didn't get knocked out just got embedded into my gum. I mean, is that a fight? My ears got clapped. One of them got clapped real hard, bursted my eardrums, and blood's flowing. I mean, you just took a licking. And you go home and your family says, what the hell happened to you? And you say, I want to fight. And they're like, if that's a win, that's a fight you don't want to get in. See my point? And we don't even know if we could win. So we're looking at an opponent, and we're faking them out. We're saying, you better do this or we'll attack you. And we'll think about this. And we will obliterate your ability to create a nuclear weapon. Well, the whole damn thing's a fake, because the U.S. intelligence assessment said that Iran is not trying to create a nuclear weapon. So that's a fake. We know that Israel wants to destroy Iran, and that's what that's really about. So even this business that it's about nuclear weapons and nuclear discussions and all is a fake. We know that behind the scenes, here's the truth. The United States wants to drag, Israel and its co-belligerents in the U.S. I mean, always hate to separate Israel from the U.S. The U.S. and its proxy Israel want to destroy Iran because Iran is a very powerful regional actor, and the United States just can't do anything it wants in the Middle East because it has Iran and Iran's allies there as a counter force to its hegemonic designs on the Middle East. Iran is also a partner of Russia and China. Iran is also integral to the Belt and Road and to China's, north-south corridor and all these other things. So Iran is a problem for the U.S. But again, the deal about whether or not Iran can have a nuclear weapon is all a fraud for all of those reasons. But then doesn't it come down to who's going to make me? So now the U.S. is supposedly negotiating with Iran, and it's highly questionable whether they have the capacity to attack and enforce Iran and enforce any deal that they do or don't make. And even further, behind the scenes of the so-called, I'll put it like this, on one side you have Iran, and the Iranians are pretty united. This is what we will do, this is what we won't do, and that it is what it is. And if you're going to attack us, if we got to fight, we'll fight. That's where we are. On the other side, you have a country where 74% of Americans, depends on how you look at it, somewhere around 3 out of every 4 Americans, want to deal with Iran, don't want a war with Iran, want to get this thing resolved peacefully. Okay, but the numbers in Congress are probably opposite. So what you have is a deal where the alignment between the people and their representatives are pretty much 180% in the opposite direction, according to even the polls, right? You have an issue where that even amongst the leaders, amongst the Trump administration, you got people probably like, I would say Trump and maybe Vance and some other people who are like, we don't want another big war. I think they really want to focus on U.S. economics, but I could be wrong. But my suspicion is Trump and his MAGA type allies don't really want a big war with Iran. We've seen some things come from Vance that implies that he don't want a big war with Iran. Maybe we're wrong. We've seen things in the past say that, he's belligerent towards Iran, but my intuition, my spider senses say to me that there is a fight going on amongst the power elite, and that there's a faction that wants a war with Iran, and that the faction that doesn't want war with Iran, that Trump's in that faction. I don't think he wants a war with Iran. That ain't saying we ain't going to get it. I don't think Trump wants it. So on the American side, you have a fight within a fight. You have a fight within the administration. You have a fight in Congress. Excuse me, I don't mean in Congress. You have a fight wherein Congress is versus the American people. And last but not least, you have an issue wherein you have a lot of members of Congress who probably feel, I really wouldn't want the deal. But if Trump goes ahead and does this, MAGA is going to be furious. And that will destroy Trump and wipe out his presidency. And they're right. So you have a certain element there who would be happy to do this just to obliterate MAGA, because the MAGA coalition, such as it is now, is still together. It's on shaky ground, but And I'm not saying I'm for or against it. This is what it is. This is reality. The MAGA coalition is the only really coherent political coalition in the United States today, and they would like to disintegrate it and scatter it to the wind. And the easiest way to do that is the MAGA coalition don't want a big war with Iran. I don't think they want a big war. And the easiest way to infuriate them and to separate them from Trump, to decapitate a decapitation strike on the MAGA movement, would be to get a war with Iran, in my opinion. Anyway, that's one. If I start talking about the other two, what's going to be different? Think about this. I just spent all that time, well, okay, 20 minutes, talking about the issues surrounding the Iran nuclear talks. If I talk about the Ukraine-Russia conflict, tell me what's going to be unique about that. The United States is saying to the Russians, hey, look, you need to take this ceasefire, or we may do bone crushing sanctions. We may do this. We may do that. You got to take it. It implies, if I say you got to take this deal, it implies that I have the capacity to enforce that edict. You got to do this. And the Russians' position is, and who's going to make us? It always come back to that with every deal. And who's going to make us? Here, we've written this contract. You got to take this contract. And the Russians are, and you and who else's army is going to force us, right? What is anything different there? Now, here's the next question. Does the United States have the military or economic capacity to force Russia to do this? The United States, and let me add this. If the U.S. tried militarily, I don't see that happening. They don't want to, and they understand that that will be nuclear annihilation immediately. But economically, if the United States goes after Russia economically, we're going to get our teeth knocked out, our eyes poked out, our throats smashed, our bones broken. I mean, think about this. Here's what they're saying, 500% or some level of massive sanctions, not on Russia. On any country that deals with Russia. Well, who deals with Russia? Saudi Arabia. Tariffs. That's what they're saying. 500% tariffs. Saudi Arabia. Oh boy. So any oil we get from Saudi Arabia is going to have a 500% tariff, huh? See, I wonder how that'll work out. That will include India. Oh boy, that's really going to help lower the cost of pharmaceuticals, a lot of which come from India. 500% increase. How about China? I think we had a slice of that pie a month or so ago, and that didn't work out so well. We're still flopping around on the floor like a flounder trying to fix that debacle. So we're threatening Russia. If you don't do what we want, we'll take an action. But if we take that action, one might argue not only the potential, but the likelihood is that it will have a disastrous outcome for us. If we take the option of attacking Iran, one might argue that it has the likelihood of a catastrophic at minimum economic outcome, in that they're going to damn sure close down the Straits of Hormuz. There ain't no question about that. 20%, I hear different numbers, 18, 20, 30% of the world's oil. At that point, travels through there will be shut off, which means you're doubling, tripling the price of oil. How do you think that's going to work out in the United States and throughout the West with minimum triple the price of energy? Not good. Economic collapse. Might I add, who sells that very same oil and gas that comes out of through the Straits of Hormuz? A lot of gas comes from Qatar and different places have massive gas facilities. So who's going to make up the difference? Russia. You get outside of the Middle East and Russia's pumping a hell of a lot of oil. So bottom line is this: the price of oil will triple, and Russia, well, they won't be happy about it. They won't like it, but they'll make a fortune until such time as it gets straightened out, which God knows when that'll be. Let me add this. If you take it too far and push Iran too far, Iran can obliterate the oil infrastructure in the Middle East. And then what happens? And then you're going to be 10 years. You're going to be a decade before you're able to rebuild that oil infrastructure, which means we're going to be, wandering around eating each other like a bunch of zombies. You're going to have, hunger. You're going to have massive. Now, Again, that wipes out the U.S. empire, and that wipes out the West, the global economy. Is that a win? Is that a win? And politically, you'd be looking at, likely physical revolution in the United States, kinetic revolution in the United States. Come on, people wouldn't put up with that. It wouldn't just be that the MAGA would fall apart. There would be a revolt of a nature that I would not like to describe, because I believe it would be violent. And if you create that level of poverty based on the decisions of the ruling elite, you're asking for this guillotine time. So I don't, see that as an option. Now let's go last but not least. Let's move over to good old China. And what do we have? Well, the U.S. is threatening China. Again, it's a belligerent. We're building up bases. Pete Hegseth the other day is out there doing speeches about China as an imminent threat, and our allies in the region, Ukraine 2.0s, right? Our vassals in the region need to spend more money so they can prepare to be used as cannon fodder against China. Pete Hegseth doing all of that stuff. China's problem, blah, 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 blah. And at the same time that the U.S. is threatening massive war against China, we're supposedly negotiating with them over a tariff, something or other, right? Over tariffs. So if I'm China, I'm thinking to myself, well, you're threatening me. I really want to destroy your economy. And even if I got to take a hit, it's a whole lot easier for me to destroy your economy now and take a punch than it is to have to fight you in a war later and take a big punch. So if I'm China, I'd probably say, we don't really need to negotiate. I'd probably say, now I know I'm going to take an economic hit now, and I know I'm going to take pain, but it's going to be devastating. It's going to obliterate you, right? And I may say, I'd rather obliterate you now economically than have to obliterate you later. But that's a whole different philosophical discussion, policy discussion, whether or not China would be far better off to take their medicine now and say, we're going to have to endure some pain. But the U.S. will endure a hell of a lot more pain, and we want them to endure a hell of a lot more pain. And we want to, in the same way that the U.S. always says, we're going to weaken Russia. Now, if I'm China, I would seriously consider the concept of weakening the U.S. now. But at any rate, different discussion. Here's my point. The U.S., as it attempts to mediate some deal with China, at the same time it's taking belligerent, using, putting out militarily and kinetically belligerent rhetoric against China. They're saying China's not cooperating. China won't work with us. And China's not this and China's not that. Well, you know what? Here's the problem. It implies that the U.S. has a strong hand. It implies that China has to do deals with us. China better do this. China's not complying. China's not working with us. They're not doing what we want. They're not giving us what we want. Number one. So what you going to do about it? You can't make them do anything. Can you? No, you can't. Again, you're negotiating and whining because the people that you're negotiating aren't going along with what you want, but you don't have the capacity to force them. See, what we're talking about this is the same thing. The U.S. empire is accustomed to the unipolar moment, right? Hey, Russia and China are weak. We're the only world power, so everybody has to comply to every one of our whims. That's the implication. But we're unable to use the core or to back up that coercive rhetoric and force people to do it. When you could back it up, that's fine. You better do it or else. And a person could say, who's going to make me? And the U.S. could say, me. And then we could make them. Now, when someone says, who's going to make me? We can't back them up. But back it up. We're still using the same coercive rhetoric to Russia. You better take this deal or else. Russia's like, okay, well, we'll go with or else. Iran, you better do it or we're going to attack you. Iran's going to say, well, we prefer not to have a war, but if, it is what it is. Let's do what we got to do. Fair enough. Iran's, putting us on notice. If you're going to attack us, in fact, from what I hear, Iran feels like they don't really believe we'll attack us. And to a large extent, I don't really believe we'll attack them. Because I don't think Trump wants to risk the kind of bloody nose that he'll get from attacking him. And he may get not just a bloody nose, but a bloody everything else. Now, what is the U.S. going to do? Attack Iran and Iran knocks the hell out of us and Israel. And then what? Okay, well, we'll use nuclear weapons against Iran. And that nuclear cloud's going to float all over the place to allies, and the nuclear fallout may hit allies and enemies alike. And now the world is going to say, we got to isolate the U.S. And by the way, what did we do that again for? Why did we attack Iran? To stop them from getting nuclear weapons, because they could be dangerous if they get nuclear weapons. And then when they kick our ass for attacking them first, then we're going to use nuclear weapons. The United States, this country, when it comes to our ability to do business with other countries, will not be what it was before. It won't be what it was before. And not only that, what happens if that nuclear fallout goes across the Gulf and falls out on various oil fields? And now those oil fields are contaminated. Are you going to want ships covered in? Who's going to let them come to your harbor? Yeah, we got fleets of ships. We got ships. We got all kinds of material coming from the Middle East. Wait a minute. Let's check our Geiger counter. And it's click, 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 click. Uh-oh. So even doing that is likely going to wipe out the global economy. Not only that, if you use a nuclear weapon, we already know Iran has made it clear, or at that point, it's over for Israel. Iran has, I've heard Alistair Crook talk about it. Iran has probably dozens of bases deep in the mountains that we don't even know where they are. Look, we couldn't find the bases, the underground bases for Ansar Allah in Yemen. What are the chances we're going to find them in Iran? Zero. Zero. So what happens? According to Alistair Crook, he says years ago, Israel's not going to use a nuclear weapon against Iran. It was at least a year ago, maybe more. And what Alistair Crook said, a guy who I respect a lot, said, look, Iran has bases in the mountains with hundreds of thousands of missiles just waiting. And if Israel or the U.S. were to use a nuclear weapon, launch some kind of a decapitation strike, as it were, in Tehran, that these people then have the instructions, right? The old dead hand instructions to fire all of their missiles nonstop on Israel and U.S. and American targets in the region, and of course, oil infrastructure, to fire them nonstop. And he said, and it could take months, because of the numbers that they have. So at that point, what happens? The U.S. bases in the area are getting obliterated. Israel's getting obliterated. What are you going to do? You're just getting fire more nuclear weapons, and then everything's just getting obliterated. What do you think? Israel has a nuclear power plant. What do you think is going to happen to that? You think that ain't going to get blown to smithereens and it's going to melt down and Israel's going to be uninhabitable? So you win? Oh boy, we don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon or whatever it is. We don't want to. So what are you going to do? We're going to commit suicide, basically. We're going to put a gun to our mouth, heads. Hey, you better do what we want or we'll pull the trigger. That's effectively what we're talking about. China. So what are we going to do? China says we got 90 days and we'll walk away. And if we don't have a deal, so be it. And the U.S. is like, China's not cooperating. China's like, yeah, well, you could. If you choose to interpret it that way, that's fine. And China's looking at Iran. China's looking at Russia, and Russia's has a history. There's a historical context for Russia. You've got the Minsk Accords that the U.S. never kept, and later on, the U.S. vassals admitted that we only made the deal to set Russia aside for a while so that we could build up. Ukraine, that it was the old saying of diplomacy being the art of saying nice doggy until you can get a rock in your hand and bash the dog over the head with it to get the look. Nice doggy. And the dog just stops and he wags his tail. Meanwhile, you're grabbing a rock, bam, right over the head and kill him. That's all the Minsk Accord was, and Russia knows it. Problem is now that the U.S. is getting weaker by the day. Look at the bond market. We're getting weaker by the hour. And recently there was an article that came out. Now, I didn't read the article. I don't have the full details on it, but I was listening to Alexander McCurris talk about the article where they were discussing the problems with the U.S. military, where of our 11 nuclear, what do they call it? Carrier groups, only like 4 of them at any given time are really able to respond and fight. 4 out of 11. And those are all going to get sunk anyway. Let's face it. If you go against a peer competitor, they're all done. Your ships, you're going to be devastated now with the kinds of anti-shipping missiles that they have now. I mean, what are you really going to do with the carrier? It's a big, sweet, fat target, and it's the first thing that your enemy's going to do is say, "Let's sink some targets." Then what are you going to do? Fire nuclear weapons, and then the whole. And as soon as you fire the first, dude, you have ended it. If you attack Iran, you have ended your economy. If you attack China, if you attack Russia, you've ended humanity, because they're going to respond with nuclear, and it's all over. So the United States, but all that being said, the final outcomes, it still makes things it comes out to the same thing, and that is, because the U.S. doesn't have the capacity to enforce the outcome of the deal, it doesn't have the capacity to dictate to all parties in the deal what the outcome has to be. And you've got to change the language. If I say to you, let's make a business deal, and you say, okay, and I say, now, I've already written the contract, and I put everything that I wanted that benefits me, nothing that benefits you. My lawyers wrote it, and they took time very carefully to ensure that this thing benefits me and gives me everything I want and gives you nothing. Oh, and by the way, even after I sign a deal, I'm not going to keep up my end of the bargain, right? So I'm going to write a deal that benefits me that you do not want. And you already know that I'm not going to keep up my end of the bargain. And then I'm going to say, you better sign the deal and you better keep up your end of the bargain, even though the deal benefits me, not you. And I ain't keeping up my end of the bargain. Who's going to sign that? Only if you have the capacity to enforce such a one-sided outcome. And we're trying to do it with Russia. And it's China, if you with Iran and China, and literally with Russia. You think you're this is how delusional a deteriorating empire it becomes. They're losing the war. They all came together. They brought all of their vassals, their everything they could around the world. They grabbed every weapon, every gun, every shell, every tank. Excuse me. They grabbed everything they could get their mitts on, and they threw it all on Russia. And they still lost. The war's lost. It is effectively lost. You know what I mean? It is lost in the same way that if you and I are playing chess and we both look at the board, and I know right now, any move I make, I lose. The game's effectively over. If we're looking and I'm like, if I do that, he's going to do that. If I do this, he's going to do, and I go through every move I could possibly make, and I say, there's no way that I can get out of a checkmate here. Effectively, the game is over. I can make those moves if I want to, but effectively, the game's over. You know, it's like you watching a soccer match and one side is up 5-1 and the other team gets the ball and they take it out of bounds and they're coming up the field, right? They're down 5-1 and they look and there's 15 seconds left on the clock. Sometimes they'll kick the ball up the field and just kind of jog behind it. And the defense doesn't even run after them or try to challenge them. There's 15 seconds left on the clock. They're up 5-1. What are you going to do? It'll take you 15 seconds to dribble the ball down there and shoot it. And if you do that, it's 5-2. They get out of the way. If you want to take it up there and shoot it and make it 5-2 instead of 5-1, go ahead. Effectively, it's over. There's nothing that can change the outcome. And once you get to that point, what do? You're playing chess. The game's over. There's no way to change the outcome. Clear the board and start again. What's the point of going through the motions? Now, in the event of Russia, the war's effectively won by Russia now. Now, the only thing that the MI6 and CIA can do is what they're doing. They're doing some terrorist acts in Russia. We'll blow up a bridge. We'll kill some civilians. They can do that stuff because they're terrorists, and that's what terrorists do. But effectively, it's not. Well, I'll make it a little bit different. It may affect the outcome of the war in that Russia is going to have the ability to impose its will on the Ukrainian conflict, and it could affect what Russia decides to, how they would decide to end up, how far they decide to go, how much they decide to destroy, what actions they decide to take. So it could affect the outcome of the conflict, but not in the way that a party who wanted to dominate and impose their will on the outcome would want. So could it affect the outcome? Yeah, but not in a good way for you, in a bad way for you. But at this point, what we see is like the screamings of a madman. We can't win the war, so we'll just do some terrorist acts or something against Russia. Yeah. Let's do some terrorist acts against Russia. Why? Because there's getting ready to be a negotiations. If you notice, whenever there's going to be negotiations, MI6 and the CIA dramatically increase the terrorist actions the day before. Some drones on Moscow. If there's going to be a May 9th day, drones on, they just like clockwork. The Russians already know, okay, we're going to negotiate Monday. That means over the weekend, they're going to try to blow some stuff up and there's going to be terrorist attacks. That's a given. That's a given. To discourage, hopefully, the negotiations, and ultimately, I think Russia's going through the emotions. It's in the same way that the U.S. is pretending to be a negotiator when they're a belligerent and they're pushing what's a fake deal. I think the Russians are pushing a fake deal too. I think the Russians are pretending. Don't get me wrong. I believe that the Russians are genuine, and in fact, if they could get a deal, they'd take one. But I think the Russians are pretending that they believe that the United States and NATO would somehow negotiate in good faith and would keep their word. They're pretending that they believe that when they know it's not true. So what we have is a U.S. empire that's crumbling, a U.S. empire that's weakening, deteriorating internally, politically, morally, every way you can think about it. You have an empire that's deteriorating, and 3 identical negotiation sessions. I don't know what the hell you want to call them. But whatever the case may be, there are 3: Iran, Russia, China, and they're all the same one: a deteriorating former possible kind of hegemon, but at least a super duper power, shall we say, right? A deteriorating one that they seem to be the only ones that haven't figured out, or won't at minimum accept that they don't have the coercive capacity to dictate the outcomes when they negotiate with other powers. Iran's a rising power. Russia and China have already risen, and the U.S. is trying to pretend like this is 1995. It ain't 1995, dude. And now, all 3, interestingly enough, this is going to be a huge summer, because I did a video yesterday where I talked about the Ukraine conflict coming to, being at a crisis point. But realistically, this is a crisis point for the entire U.S. This is a crisis point for the entire U.S. empire, right? This summer's a crisis point. It is now saying to people, I can coercively dictate the outcome to anything. And the whole world's looking, saying, what about here, here, and here? Let's see what's happening. You're negotiating. What happens if you go over 3, which is my prediction? China's already said, we ain't going to give you a deal that don't work for us. And we're China. You haven't figured out how powerful we are. Maybe you need to economically. And China's like this. We can walk away from the deal. You can't. See, anytime you're bargaining, you have to have a win-win deal. Because if it's win-lose, then your whoever you're negotiating with can't take the deal. If it's lose-win, then you can't take the deal. If it's lose-lose, nobody can take the deal. You need a win-win deal. And the United States is saying to everybody, we want 3 lose-win deals. And everybody's saying, we're not taking a lose-win deal. And the U.S. is saying, we can coerce and force you to take a lose-win deal. And the other side is saying, well, that's pretty much what you're going to have to do. So now we're going to have to, at the same time, simultaneously, we're going to have to tariff the daylights out of China and India, because they're still buying stuff from Russia. Now think about this. Simultaneously, we're going to have to launch massive tariffs against anybody that does business with Russia. Massive, which is going to dramatically affect our economy in a negative way. That's one thing we're going to have to do. Secondly, China, period, point blank, we're not going to have a bargain with them. We're going to go back to 145% tariffs minimum against them anyway without this, which means our shelves are going to be empty. So massive tariffs against India because, hey, they're doing business with Russia. Massive sanctions against China either way. So now our shelves are empty and businesses are going to be crashing. And at the same time, we're going to have to attack Iran and start a war with Iran, which will immediately mean, if nothing else, the Straits of Hormuz are closed, which will triple, let's just say, minimal double, most likely triple the cost of energy. 145% tariffs on China. We know how that ends. Empty shelves. Massive sanctions on India and everybody else that we can't do business with them no longer because Russia won't do what we want. War with Iran and Straits of Hormuz closed at minimum. Maximum white infrastructure wiped out. We got to do that this summer. All those things this summer. All those things we have to do. When all three of those countries who are allies say, no, we won't take your so-called fake deal. The United States government is in a sticky wicket, isn't it? It has pushed itself into a corner, and it's simply by being so arrogant. It's simply hubris. It's simply by not accepting the reality that the U.S. empire is not the preeminent military and economic force that it once was. That's where we are. And guess what? You're not going to be able to fake a deal with people anymore. You're going to have to give them a deal that takes into account their needs. And if you don't do that, they're going to say, do what you got to do. Oh, Russia's going to be, you're going to do whatever you're going to do to us? Got to do it. Didn't work. Sorry. Have a nice day. China's going to be like 145% tariffs. It is what it is. We're ready to live with it. And Iran's going to say, you're going to attack us? All right. We got to get ready to mine this. We don't have time to talk with you right now. We're too busy mining the Straits of Hormuz. We will see what's going to happen. Thank you very much. Let's see. We do have some folk, as Barack Obama would say, we killed some folk. We do have some folk who have done, let's go here. The Zimmerman telegram was used as an excuse for the U.S. to enter World War I, where Germany wanted to ally with Mexico if the U.S. entered the war. So how can the U.S. Trump not understand Russia's concerns of NATO in Ukraine? It's not that they don't understand it. That's not the issue. The issue is that the U.S. actively wants to destroy Russia. That it's not them understanding. It's not whether they do or don't understand. It's that they're not bargaining in good faith. The United States wants to destroy Russia so it can dominate the world and take out China. The Europeans want to destroy Russia so they can take all of its natural resources and they can economically survive. So the reasons they're giving us for doing whatever they do with Russia are all lies. This is all just a plot to destroy Russia, and Russia knows it, and I know it. So the intricate details, geoeconomic details, are irrelevant because the U.S.'s and the West's plans towards Russia are all based on lies. Next, how will Russia respond to today's drone attack? I think it'll maintain course and speed. I think Russia knows we're winning the war, and that's all that Ukraine can do. They can launch terrorist attacks or this and that, but actually on the contact line, they are losing. And Russia is going to do what they do. They're going to continue to work. What else are they going to do? You know what I mean? Well, maybe some extra Oreshnik attacks, maybe some extra drone attacks, something like that. Sure, they've got to do something that sends the message to the Russian people, we punch back. But it will just further drive home the message that this is an existential crisis for Russia, that the West is out to get them, that they are Ukraine's a terrorist organization that needs to be thrashed to pieces. But they already know that. So I don't think Russia is going to get freaked out over something. They're just going to continue to work to stop it, but they're going to continue. I think, let me just say this. I think that Russia has put out some pretty strong warnings to Ukraine and the West. And I think what Russia's saying now is really bring the hammer down, and they're starting to. And I just think that Russia's set for offensive actions. And after this so-called meeting in Istanbul. The Russians will say it was a good meeting. It was great. We want to maintain and continue these dialogues or blah, blah, blah. And they will bring the hammer down, continue to bring the hammer down, if not increase it on Ukraine. I don't think Russia reacts to individual actions like this. Like people would say, oh, this happened. How are the Russians going to respond? Now that happened. How are the Russians going to respond? No, that's the way the West operates. The West responds to things. That's called being reactionary or reactive. This happens, I got to respond. The Russians, the most response they'll do is response to the anger and anxiety of the Russian people. And they'll just hit the normal targets they were hitting with drones, throw a few extra drones and say that was a retaliation. But for the most part, I don't think I think maintain course and speed. That's what you're looking at. Let's see, anything else? Do we have, here we go. Putin is a disappointment and Russian military overrated. Well, certainly have a right to that opinion. You should check your phone. Why are you calling me on my phone? It's around here somewhere. Why should I check my phone? Okay, I'll check my phone. Thanks, Jay. And I will check my phone. What am I checking it for, by the way? Oh, let's see. Last but not least, if I want an ally, Putin's Russia is not what I would want. Well, there you go. It's a good thing you don't want an ally, because I noticed you said if you want an ally, but apparently you don't want an ally. So there you go. If you wanted an ally, you wouldn't want Russia. Well, I guess that's kind of a weird negative, but I guess if I was hungry, I wouldn't eat green peas because I hate green peas. If I wanted to go swimming, I wouldn't jump in the sewer. I like to be more assertive. Like if I wanted an ally, I'd choose so-and-so. However, I certainly appreciate your position, and I certainly you have every right to that position. It confuses me a little bit. If I wanted an ally, Putin's Russia is not what I would want. Confuses me a bit, but thank you very much for watching the show and contributing to the channel. I appreciate that. As I always say, I don't believe in just sitting around hanging out with people who agree with me. Certainly, I welcome those who have an alternative perspective. And I think it's critical that alternative media always respects those who have alternative perspectives. Flying Bear, Russia should do what Israel do if you want to defeat your enemies. So that would be a genocide. Well, I'll put it like this. To me, when you say Russia should do what Israel is doing, right? I can disagree with you strongly, but here's what I would say as a man who studies Zen. I could say fish should do what birds do, but then it wouldn't be a fish, would it? It would be a bird. I can say guppies should do what killer whales should do. They should do what something else does, but then it wouldn't be a guppy, would it? It would be a killer whale, right? So to say that Russia, as it is, should do something that Russians wouldn't do is to simply not really. Are you really saying anything? And according to who? I mean, your opinion is Russia should do something different than they're doing, but that's not the opinion of Russians, which means they wouldn't be Russians if they did that. They'd be you. So if I say, I don't think you should do that, I think you should do this. If I give somebody that advice, but they're not me, are they? So then if they did it, they wouldn't be them. They'd be me. But you got a right to say you think that Russia should do what Israel should do. And then other people would say, well, I think Israel should do what Russia's doing. You know, sure. I appreciate the fact that you have every right to that. I'm just pointing out that there is a, shall we say, logical error there when you say that a basketball player should do what a hockey player does. Well, then you can't do that because you're not on ice and you don't have a hockey stick and you're not playing hockey. And you wouldn't be a basketball player. You'd be a hockey player then. That's my point. But thank you very much. All right. Raphael says, there will be a point Putin will be removed for incompetence. Oh, well, we will see that. I tend to, based on what I know in Russia, I tend to think not, but you got to understand how Russians think. All right. I certainly appreciate all of those certainly positions that people have taken, and controversial and all that kind of stuff. And that's good. I think that is what makes um, that's what makes alternative media special. I think that's what draws people to alternative media. I think the fact that people can actually be in the chat and make statements that are controversial or whatever, and nobody's going to say, "How dare you say that?" Instead, somebody's going to say, "You know what? I appreciate that opinion. That's what we're here for, to get different opinions, separate opinions, and to provide a platform." That's important to me, that I provide a platform for people to say things that other people say, "I think that's great." And other people say, "That's stupid." But that's what this platform's about. It's not MSNBC, CNN, Fox, where a bunch of people come on and just say, "Yes, the CIA is telling you the truth. The military industrial complex are good. And let's go neocons." No, that's not what we're all about. We're here to say, we're going to have a conversation. I don't have the answers. I just throw some crap out there and, hope some of it makes sense. And there are people that think it doesn't. And that's even better. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to thank everybody as I head out. Follow me on Rumble and Rockfish. Patreon's good if you can afford to donate. PayPal, buy me a coffee. As I always say, that's so simple. Just buy Garland a coffee. How much? $5. How many do you want? Whatever, 3, 4 million. You name it. And last but not least, then you can just click make it monthly or one time. Monthly is great, but one time's great too. Thank you very much. And of course, there's my P.O. Box, P.O. Box 32, Glen Burnie, Maryland. How's that? There are people that want to make donations via the P.O. Box to send a check or cash. There's people who want to just write a letter and say thanks, or "I think you're an idiot." Those both are welcome. There's people who want to send a card. People send cards. People send books. I really appreciate it. It makes me feel like I'm accomplishing something. Thanks a lot, everybody. Here's what's important. Share this on all your social media platforms. I'm out.